This video is entitled Factors on Architecture and goes along with Topic 8 of our Systems Analysis and Design course. I'm Dr. Renaud from Shawnee State University, and I'll be taking you through this video. This video also is a companion for Chapter 8 of Systems Analysis and Design 7th edition by Dennis Wixom Roth, published by Wiley, which is the textbook we'll be using for our class. So in the last presentation, we talked about architecting the software and going through the various needs of the software, from data storage to data access to application rules to presentation. We also talked about networks, tiers, hardware, and all of that kind of stuff. Now that's very much the nuts and bolts of architecture, but as we're designing an architecture, we also desperately need to pay attention to the operational requirements and make sure that our architecture makes sure that what we're designing will meet the operational requirements. Also, we need to maintain and understand the performance requirements, the security requirements, and the cultural and political requirements, which is something that you think, well, it's a computer system. What do I need to worry about culture and politics? But that's a very important part of designing a system, and we'll talk about each of these on a separate slide. So operational requirements. These include technical requirements like what operating systems, what browsers, what mobile devices, what other technologies will we need to support. The system integrations requirements, which we talked about that as we were talking about purchasing software in Chapter 7, and we talked about that a little bit in outsourcing. But that's also part of an operational requirement when we're designing the system, when we're picking the system, that we've got to make sure that we can do the integrations that are necessary. Portability is another operational requirement that may be necessary. For instance, do we develop in a Windows environment and port to a Linux environment? Do we want it to be portable to another operating system for support? What devices, what operating systems, and other kind of things? Are we developing it absolutely for Apple only? Or do we want it to be portable to Windows also? And then an operational requirement that needs to be included is its maintainability. If it's a packaged software, how often is it going to be updated? If it's a software that you write in-house, if it's a custom piece of software, how easy is it going to be to modify? So as we go through our design of the software, as we go through the design of the hardware, as we go through the design of the networks, we have to ask ourselves these questions as well. The next group of requirements that we absolutely have to keep in mind at all times is the idea of performance. Because if we write a system that's slow, we write a system that's, that just doesn't keep up with us, or isn't as reliable as we need, or can't handle the demand, then we've wasted our time and money, haven't we? So performance requirements we can think of in three big areas. We can think of the speed. How fast does it work? For instance, when a user mashes submit on our website, how long are they willing to wait? With most users, it's about 2 seconds. And if you don't respond with a message back saying it's working, they'll mash the button again. And what's that going to do to your software, getting a transaction sent more than once from a browser? That can cause problems. How fast does it take to download a page? How long does it take to update the database, to query the database? Those are all very important questions that we have to build into our design. Those aren't things we worry about later. Oh, well, we'll speed it up later. There are lots of things you just can't speed up, and you've got to start with speed in your mind as you're architecting the system. Another thing is, how about capacity? Can it handle can your architecture, your software design, your hardware design handle the current demand? Can it handle the future demand? Because if your business owner or business rules or business people say to you, well, we expect to double in size in 5 years, then your software better be able to handle that and a lot more. Um, What are the bandwidth requirements? How much network do you really need to support this? If your tiers are scattered across data centers, how much bandwidth? How much bandwidth does the end user, the end client need on his or her desktop? Do you have to support? And the storage capacities. I mean, those are all very important questions with speed and capacity. And here's a capacity I want to talk about. Imagine you're writing a e-commerce website. You know that it might work great in January. It might work beautifully in March and April. But what about on Black Friday and Thanksgiving when everybody's jumping on your website to order Christmas presents? What about Cyber Monday after after Thanksgiving when everybody's gone back to the office or gone back to work and is online buying Christmas presents? Is your system going to be able to handle that kind of capacity? Be sure to bake that in to your design. Another thing that's important to as a performance we need to is its availability and reliability. How available is it? You know, does it need to be 24/7, or are we only going to run this system for 10 hours a day while the stores are open? Do we need 99.9% reliability, or is 98% reliability going to work okay for us? What are the maintenance intervals? How often are we going to have to shut this 24/7 system down to be able to maintain it, upgrade it, upgrade the servers, and all of those kinds of things? And then we need to ask ourselves the availability and reliability of our base hardware um, and our networks. Because if you've only got one network connection into your data center, then your reliability is going to be not so great some days because maybe a backhoe cut that piece of fiber, or maybe you're having problems with a piece of network hardware where if you really need 24/7, 99.9% reliability, you're going to need redundant data circuits and all kinds of things that you're going to need to, again, design into your architecture. Don't try to do this after the fact. Know these answers first, know them now. Another group of requirements that you have to think about when you're building a building, that you have to think about when you're building a system, is the security requirements. How much money is your data worth to your business? What is the real value of your data? What happens if it all just went away? What happens if your competitor just took it all? How much is your data worth? And be sure you spend the money you need to protect your data. This is what in a lot of businesses, they feel that their data is their biggest asset. I've got a friend who works at Kroger in a senior position, and she was saying to me in a conversation I had with her several years ago that the executives at Kroger believe their data from their point of sale systems, from their warehousing systems, from their purchasing systems, from their buyer loyalty system is their biggest asset. They believe it's worth more than the largest grocery store chain in the nation's stores are. That's how they feel about it. And I think all of us should feel that way about our corporate data. Another thing that we need to worry about in security is access control. A user should only be able to access the parts they're supposed to. We should bake access control into our software, not try to cobble it on after the fact. It should be built in from the very beginning. Maybe you have HIPAA problems, which is medical privacy data, Health Information Patient Privacy Act, which is a U.S. federal law that says that patient data can only be used for certain things. Um, a secretary, for instance, can't in the doctor's office can't see your test results because that's a violation of the HIPAA rules. That's a violation of who can see what. What roles of users do we need, and how do we need to segregate the data into and data access into various roles of the system? Also, we need audit trails. Again, part of HIPAA and part of several systems are audit trails of who actually did that job, actually did that data entry, who made that adjustment, who posted that transaction, and who opened up that file and looked at it. Those are very important things that we need to build into the system. It's got to be part of it. Encryption and authentication is another security requirement that we need to build into our systems. How is data going to be encrypted from point to point? Are we going to use, and then how do we authenticate a user that's connecting into our system or a client piece of software? Is it going to be a simple little two-factor user ID and password? Well, that's not very secure because people write their passwords down on scratches of paper and stick it as a post-it note on their bulletin board. Uh, uh, how many users have got a notebook in their desk with all their passwords in it? So all you got to do is open their desk and there's all the passwords. So a two-factor authentication is poor at best. Three-factor authentication of using a thumbprint or using a device like a YubiKey or one of those keys that has a secret number that you've got to type in, a hardware, a third factor, or even a text back third factor authentication. Remember also that with encryption and authentication, there very well are legal requirements to protect patient data, customer data, credit card data, and lots of other kinds of data. And if your data is worth if you really understand what your data is worth, then encryption, authentication, and access control are essential. And again, have to be part of your initial architecture. Virus, malware, ransomware issues are also security requirements. How open are your clients to susceptibility to these? If you have a user that accidentally opens up the wrong website and downloads something suspicious, and it happens to get through your virus checker on your desktop, is it going to eat the network? Those are questions you need to ask yourself. And lastly, security requirements dealing with the network, net traffic. How encrypted is net traffic? Do you have VPNs connecting remote locations? Is your data flowing across the interweb or flowing across bits of network that are public or that could be accessed in the clear? So these are all requirements that we need to have in our head as we're architecting the system, as we're architecting the software and the hardware. Then the last category of requirements that we need to fully have listed, we need to have lists of these, are the cultural requirements and political requirements. For instance, do you need to support a multilingual customer? Do you need to support a multilingual employee? Um, if you have a store in the South or especially in the Southwest, you're going to need to support Spanish. If you have a store or you're going to move operations into Canada, you're going to need to support French. Um, you're going to need to support multiple currencies, maybe. Not everybody in the world uses the U.S. dollar. Not everybody. There are certain kinds of country-specific data. In Europe, there are all kinds of rules about ways personal data can be used, stored, and transmitted. And a lot of it is that personal data collected in Europe cannot be moved to the United States because the United States doesn't protect data by law as vociferously as well as the European Union does. So we have to worry about country specific data and maybe leaving data for each country in its country of origin. We may need to customize for jurisdictions. There could be legal requirements in here versus there, and we need to make sure our system works for all of those. Unstated norms are also an issue because how do you write a date? Most Americans write dates month, day, year, where most Europeans write dates day, month, year. So 3/2 of 2020 is a different date in America than it is in Europe. One of them is March the 2nd in the United States. It's the 3rd of February in Europe. Um, really confusing and can cause huge amounts of problem. Unstated norms. Are we measuring things in feet and inches, or are we measuring things in centimeters and meters and kilograms? Are we measuring temperatures in Fahrenheit or centigrade? Those are all unstated norms because you go to Europe, you give a number, nobody thinks of it, it could be in inches. No, it's in centimeters or it's in meters or it's in centigrade. There's not a question. Here in the United States, if you gave somebody the dimensions of something in the metric system, they'll just look at you or they'll build it wrong. So these unstated norms are huge. Also, here's a weird little unstated norm. In North America, we use a comma in the thousands place and a decimal point when we enter a number. So 123,456 looks like this. But in some places in Europe, in fact, most of Europe, they use a period for the thousands place and a comma for the decimal place. So it's not the decimal point anymore, it's the decimal comma. So you may have to display numbers and dates in both formats, or accept numbers and dates in both formats. And each user might have to choose which way they will, all kinds of crazy things. And then legal requirements. Again, I mentioned privacy, I mentioned transfer of data, but there very well could be nation specific or even jurisdictional specific legal requirements. Maybe you're collecting sales tax in 2 different states. Well, in Ohio, for instance, food in a restaurant taken to go is not taxed. Food in a restaurant taken and eaten in the restaurant is taxed for sales tax. But in like Kentucky, anything in a restaurant's taxed, whether it's to go or for here, we don't care. We charge tax. In Ohio, counties and cities and jurisdictions can have an add-on tax on top of state sales tax. In lots of states, they don't do that. In some states, food is taxable in a grocery store, where most states it's not. Some states don't even have a sales tax. So even if we're doing our little simple boutique scattered all over the country, if we sell a candy bar in our boutique, in most states that's food we don't charge tax. But in some states we do. So again, these legal requirements take a lot of time to find them all. These are all questions we've got to ask and things we've got to figure out, or our system isn't going to work. This concludes the video on all of the factors we need to think about, all the requirements that we need to think about as we're creating our system architecture. This video is copyright 2020 by James Imbrano, PhD. All rights are reserved, and I'd like to say thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in a future video.